WoW has never shied away from powerful characters in its lore. Some characters have the actual ability to devour planets, or cleave them in two with the swing of their sword. Typically, these characters are empowered by some sort of magic they wield, and in this list, we're going to be going over some of the strongest characters that do not use any magic in their kits. This will not include characters that are made stronger by an enhancer like Aloa's Blessing upon Rastakhan, or the Demon Blood in Grommash Hellscream, as magic is involved in making them more powerful. This list will only go over pure skill and strength in a character. And to start off at number 10, we have King Mechagon. King Mechagon was once one of the last contenders for the title of King of all Gnomes, next to Mechatork. Mechagon would eventually go on a search for a lost land of ancient technology, and left no trace of where he would go during this time. He had a vision that for all life to prosper as the Titans intended, the curse of flesh must be reversed, and everyone must become mechanized once again. This even included races and animals that were never originally Titan forged, and everyone needed to become as the Titans meant, even if it must be done by force. Mechagon would go on to find this mysterious land and proclaim a new kingdom upon it named after himself. He'd leave many messages around the world to tell gnomes of his finding and to join his purpose, and a large group would eventually do so. Many would begin to question the king's sanity, however, as one of the laws he created was that anything smaller than an infant must become mechanized or be executed, including small mammals like rabbits and squirrels. His reign would last an undisclosed time frame, as we do not know when he left the original Society of Gnomes, and we would first encounter him in game in BFA's 8.2 patch. We would find Mechagon had built a massive city underneath the island to inhabit his people, and the technology he had become versed in was greatly superior to even the greatest gnomes. At this point, Mechagon had also become fully mechanized, no longer having any fleshy parts of his body remaining, including any sanity he may still have had. Now, alone, Mechagon was just a single gnome who did not possess a lot of strength. But if you were to allow his creations and great mind in combat, he would become one of the most unstoppable forces on this list. Mechagon was so in harmony with his inventions that he had actually managed to create a machine that would forcibly turn every living creature on Azeroth into a mechanized version of itself. He had many killer robots at his disposal and could build almost infinite armies if given enough time. In some realities, as shown by the Bronze Dragonflight, Mechagon would actually succeed in stopping anyone who would oppose him, either in killing everything or making them become mecha warriors. He definitely earns a spot if we allow his genius to be considered, as he had the ability to create an entire apocalypse by himself. But if we remove his inventions, Mechagon just becomes a mad gnome with a flawed vision and is killed in the current timeline of WoW. So he earns his spot on this list, but not higher than 10, and could even contend with other characters for this spot despite his potential. And at number 9, we have Warchief Blackhand. Blackhand was renowned for his intense tenacity back in the times of the First War, being an incredibly brutal force and revered as an overall tyrant in his methods. Blackhand would lead his army of orcs through the Dark Portal and devastate the human kingdoms with ease as they swarmed the land. Blackhand's very presence was an incredible presence of anger and strategy, said to have been capable of finding any opponent's weakness. He could articulate carefully conceived plans of attack with his armies and bring forth the victory in the most dire scenarios. Many orcs had grown to require the power boost that came from the Demon Blood, but Blackhand was known to have never taken the gift and still compete at a much higher level than many of the orcs who had fell in their veins. Before the march into the Dark Portal, the orcs were led by Blackhand and tricked into thinking the Draenei were their enemies, when for the longest time, they had remained relatively peaceful with one another. They would pave a road of bones and corpses miles long at a Draenei to fuel the engine of the Dark Portal's power. The Draenei at this point were rather advanced with their technology, and being able to overcome their magical powers and superior mindsets was not an easy feat for Blackhand. Blackhand would eventually meet his demise at the hands of his second-in-command, Orgrim Doomhammer. Interestingly, the WoD version of Blackhand is most likely stronger than his original timeline counterpart. An example of this was the dominating force of ogres that lived upon Draenor that threatened to annihilate all orcs. Blackhand would successfully defeat the ruling force upon Draenor and soon aid in crowning the orcs as the domineering faction upon the planet. Blackhand was a genius tactician that would lead large groups of orcs clad in fire-infused armors against ogres and even Gron, which are known to be terrifying dragon killers. As an insanely skilled weapons master, Blackhand would be named second in command to the Iron Horde and would answer to none but Grommash Hellscream. In this reality, Blackhand would actually be the one to slay Orgrim upon Blackhand's non-hesitation in killing innocents when besieging the city of Shatrath. When it comes to actual feats in WoW, Blackhand has presented more overall than Grommash did in WoD, and the original Grommash was infused with Demon Blood, allowing Blackhand to take his spot on this list. The only notable power that Blackhand has is his namesake. His hand would be encased in a thick molten covering that would protect him, and it's thought to have been blessed from the elements, but it offers him no real advantage. And at number 8, we have Garrosh Hellscream, specifically the version of Garrosh before he was swayed by the powers of the old god, Y'Shaarj. Garrosh also was never corrupted by the demon blood. As seen in his skin, he was a true-blooded orc with no real power gains before corruption. Garrosh was introduced as the son of Grommash Hellscream in the Burning Crusade, where he would be struggling to find honor in himself since his father's disgrace in drinking the demon blood. Garrosh had also fallen ill to a disease called redpox, which in summary was a disease that managed to have a death toll in the 95 to 100% range, yet he survived it. He would help lead the Horde against the efforts of the Scourge, and upon his first meeting with the current King of Stormwind, Varian Wrynn, he immediately began to combat him, and even managed to keep Varian on his toes at a younger age than the experienced fighter Varian was. During his efforts in Northrend, Garrosh would quickly become an idolized figure to the Horde for his brutal tactics and efficient strategy in slaughtering Scourge. Many in the Horde looked up to Garrosh, and Thrall would eventually mark Garrosh as the warchief of the Horde during the Cataclysm, as Thrall would be summoned to aid Azeroth in repairing it due to Deathwing's eruption. Karen Bloodhoof, father of Bane, would challenge Garrosh's reign as warchief in a Mak'gora, and be defeated in the process of the duel by Garrosh, who had begun wielding his father's axe, Gorehowl. Karen would be defeated by Garrosh in this duel despite having more experience and age on Garrosh, but this is only implied due to an unknowing poison applied to Garrosh's weapon by Magatha Grimtotem. Garrosh would go on to lead the Horde in Cataclysm, conquering many new lands in the Horde's name, including the human kingdom of Gilneas with the aid of the Forsaken. His name would uphold his title of Hellscream, and in Mists of Pandaria he would continue this path of annihilation. He'd managed to keep the experienced Varian at bay with his strategies and ultimately the Pandaren forces as well. As Garrosh became mad and went on a crusade where only orcs would reside in his horde, he would be put down by the forces of both the Alliance and his own former horde. Standing trial for his crimes, he would escape with the aid of the Bronze Dragon and warn his father in the past of what was to come if he drank the demon blood. It is here the orcs of Draenor found the Iron Horde after Garrosh's warning, and Garrosh would stand at his father's side in the Warsong clan. As players progressed the questline of the WoD expansion, Thrall, his former teacher, would challenge Garrosh to a Mak'gora. In this duel, Garrosh would prove to have learned much, even without the aid of Thrall. Thrall was on the brink of a loss, and Garrosh would nearly deliver the killing blow on the former warchief before using the powers of the elements on Garrosh and slaying him almost immediately, debatably cheating. We wouldn't see Garrosh again until the events of Shadowlands, where he's being tortured by both the Venthyr and Mossworn. It is even in death that Garrosh is able to oppose that stand against him with the sheer willpower and determination, breaking from his chains after his captors were weakened. Garrosh would then turn his captor's own blade against him and kill Soulrender Dormazane, Garrosh's own essence being taken in the process and presumably the last we'll ever see of the former warchief. Garrosh, even before his corruption, before his trial in Mop, was known for such brutality and what orcs had become to embody, that even years after his death, the scars left upon Azeroth and its people are still felt today. There was even a vision of Garrosh succeeding in slaying all those that opposed his orcish army, but this was during his corruption of Y'Shaarj, so it shouldn't be considered in terms of raw strength. Ultimately, Garrosh was heralded for the same reasons Blackhand once was, but Garrosh had proven many more feats of strength and ability in his life than Blackhand had. And at number 7, we have Varian Wrynn. Varian is known to players as the King of the Alliance and is famous overall for his great leadership skills and effective strategies. He would help the Alliance truly prosper and grow into what it is known to be, but was always a great combatant, capable of defeating even the most renowned warriors of Azeroth. Varian's early history was struggling to learn how to become king, and would lose the allies of Quel'Thalas, Stromgarde, and Gilneas as well. Not long as kings, the orcs would attack Stormwind and ravage the city and nearly destroy it in its entirety. He would depart from Stormwind and allow his house of nobles to reside in charge, as he would fend off the orcs that threatened to take over their lands and people. Varian would leave his house of nobles in charge of Stormwind, and they would rebuild the city from the ground up, but accumulate a massive debt, and not pay the people for their work. Outraged, the Defiest were formed. Varian attempted to reason with his people of both nobility and the lower class. Eventually, the stonemasons that rebuilt Stormwind would kill Varian's wife, and would swear revenge on those that took her from him. After the Third War ended, the Defias still very much a problem, Varian would be captured en route to Jaina to speak with her regarding the Horde and Alliance relationships. In this process, he would sustain many methods of torture. It was here that Lady Katrana Pestor, otherwise known as Onyxia, would perform a spell to split the brutal side of Varian and his diplomatic side into two versions of himself, in order to manipulate the king when he returns to Stormwind more easily. This spell is botched and the two are completely sentient of their actions, but the brutal version of Varian is pushed off a cliff and said to be dead. This is proven untrue, as an orc caravan would discover Varian and witness him defeating a massive crocodile with just a stick. Amused, they would enslave Varian and force him to compete in their gladiatorial arena and named him Logosh, or Ghost Wolf in Orcish. Logosh would do many combats in many arenas and become infamously known to the orcs and possibly even feared to some. He quite literally embodied the spirit of Guldrin himself, one of the strongest wild gods, but it was simply his tenacity in combat. Eventually, Logosh would reunite with his Varian counterpart and learn what had become of themselves due to Onyxia's actions. The two would soon aid in revealing Onyxia to the Alliance and slay her, rescuing Anduin, who had been captured by the dragons. A spell would be performed upon Varian and it would restore his two versions into one once again, and combine everything he had learned from both sides. His incredible fighting strength and skill combined with his calm and kingly nature made for a powerful foe. Varian would go all the way to Legion and best anyone that dared impede upon himself in the Alliance. To go over each of his achievements would be an entire video in of itself. And this is already an incredibly broad summary of his character, but his strength had become legend to all of Azeroth, as even the Night Elves, a particularly proud race, had grown to recognize his power and skills and admired him incredibly as their king. His most recently renowned achievements reside in Legion, where he'd be seen slaying hordes of oncoming demons with no signs of stopping. Though with Legion's massive influx in numbers alone, his armies would be pushed back and require retreat. In the process, a Fel Reaver arrives and nearly takes the lives of all remaining Alliance soldiers and leaders. Varian would sacrifice himself, single-handedly bringing down the Fel construct that threatened his people and standing in defiance of Gul'dan, one of the most powerful magic users of Legion. Varian earned not only the respect of his people, but did so multiple times and instilled an everlasting legacy in his character for his strength and determination to the players, placing him above Garrosh and Blackhand for larger feats and a larger experience overall. And at number 6, we have Magni Bronzebeard. Magni is the former king of the dwarves and is known as the Speaker of Azeroth. He would defend Ironforge from the orcs during the Second War and aided in forging the legendary blade of the Ashbringer. Magni would wage war upon the Dark Iron clan, a clan of dwarves who had vied for supremacy over all dwarves and had joined forces with characters like Ragnaros for aid. Magni would prove himself the winner with the help of the player characters in this time, and they would retrieve the now Queen Moria Therasin from the Dark Iron to rule in the Council of Three Hammers. Now, Magni was a great warrior and surely had his feats throughout the game's history, but as of now, he hasn't risen above the other entrants. It is in Cataclysm when freakish events of natural disasters began to occur, and King Magni learns of an ancient earthen tablet that could protect his city and his people. He would undergo a selfless ritual that he knew could potentially end his life, and upon completion of the ritual, his body was petrified and turned into diamonds, presumably killing him instantly. This process would prove successful in protecting Ironforge from the disasters that struck Azeroth when Deathwing rose, and it is later revealed that Magni survived the ordeal as well. Magni would basically survive a ritual intended for earthen dwarves alone and hold together literal mountains and an entire city as he became one with Azeroth itself. He would be petrified for years until Moria had managed to free his statue-like state, and Magni would reveal that he was now the Speaker of Azeroth. During the events of Legion and BFA, we would see Magni aiding the player characters in defending Azeroth, killing demons and repairing the world of Azerite left by Sargeras. The champions of Azeroth would also receive aid from Magni during the N'Zoth encounters, as his very speech was enough to break the corruption that almost took hold, and defeat the old god in the process after freeing the champions. While magic was involved in turning Magni into his currently known diamond form, it had originally been thought to have killed him, but his body survived the process, proving his will and resilience to all. Now, Magni is so in tune with himself and the planet that all his skills prior to turning into diamond have been enhanced from his prolonged state of meditation, where he only appeared as a statue. The form Magni takes is deeply rooted in what dwarves originally were, and he still continues to wield no actual magic in his abilities outside of a hammer and a shield. And at number 5, we have Thoradin, the first ever human king in Warcraft's existence. Thoradin may be recognized by Arms Warrior players as the character who helps you in obtaining the artifact during Legion. It's in this questline we learn of the Blade's origins and Thoradin himself. Thoradin would found the very first human kingdom of Arathor. He self-proclaimed himself as the king of humans and was already known to be the warlord of the Arathi clan. He would offer his fellow human clans equality under his banner, and soon the barbarians would join forces and work together to extinguish the age-old threat of trolls that they all faced. These wars were aptly named the Troll Wars, and the humans would combat them under Thoradin's name for years. Thoradin was incredibly good at his job, killing hundreds of trolls and could fight dozens at a time all alone. This eventually earned him the surname of Trollbane, a title passed down through the ages and most recognizably within Daneth Trollbane. Thoradin's later life after the Troll Wars ending was to create a pact with the elves of Quathalas, as they had the common enemy within the trolls. They would agree on borders and prosper with one another for generations, and the elves would bestow the weapon of Stormkar, the Warbreaker, upon him. As Thoradin grew old, he began to study the origin of humans, and where they may have came from in the Tirisful Glades, learning to use Stormkar more in depth at the Lost Tomb of the Titan Keeper, Tyr. Tyr was known as a legend to the humans, and his fable of sacrificing himself to defeat a powerful lieutenant of the Old Gods by the name of Zakaj the Corruptor was known to all. As Thoradin journeyed through the tomb with the Tyr's guard, an order sworn to defend the tomb, they would inadvertently revive the very creature that slew Tyr. Zakaj would slay all the humans as he began to awaken, but this brought Thoradin enough time to devise a strategy and would kill Zakaj alone with his own dying breath. Not only was Thoradin able to convince the feuding clans of barbarian humans to unite, but he also conquered the troll threat that had plagued them for generations, and established what would eventually become the alliance that we know today. On top of this, Thoradin had managed to kill an old god minion of such strength that even Tyr fell to it. Tyr was known to be one of the strongest Titan Keepers, and for a single human to be able to match his strength in one blow, lucky or not, is incredibly powerful and shows him above the rest. And at number 4, we have Huln Highmountain. This was the spokesman for all Tauren tribes prior to the War of the Ancients, and carried the survival weapon Legion artifact, Talonclaw. Huln would unite all of the Tauren tribes under one banner, and with the Legion's first invasion through the Well of Eternity, Huln would be one of the first in line to defend his people. Huln gained most of his infamy in a battle that took place within Ajara, where he would rescue Ung-Ok and the Black Maw tribe, a tribe of Firbolg people in tune with the Wild Gods. He would also save Etero, a moose favored by the god Malorn himself. He would receive the blessing of Sonaris that would mark Huln and his people with moose-like antlers. This never provided any increase in strength and was mostly cosmetic, but let people know of their faith in the Wild Gods, and where they go, so too does Sonaris. With his blessing, he would defend Malfurion Stormrage from danger as he slew the powerful dreadlord Tychondrius. Tychondrius was known for his part in corrupting Arthas later and aiding in creating the Scourge. These events would not take place for many years at the time of Huln killing him, with the dreadlord still renowned greatly for his power, and slaying him was no easy task alone. When the War of the Ancients came to a close, Huln would return to Highmountain and would focus on a new target. At this point, Deathwing had been fully corrupted by the Old Gods and switched teams, corrupting his many Black Dragon eggs and soon spawning more servants of the Old Gods. Deathwing would reside beneath the mountains of Highmountain, and Huln would see him removed. With the help of Gruul, Huln would journey into Neltharion's lair and meet the Destroyer head-on. They would manage to equip themselves with the Hammer of Khaz'goroth from within the lair and use it against Deathwing, and liberated his Drogbar slaves to turn the tide of the battle. The hammer was the literal weapon of a Titan that resided within the Pantheon, one of the highest ranking entities in terms of power in the Warcraft universe. Wielding the hammer alone takes tremendous amounts of strength and will, so for Huln to be capable of using a Titan's tool is incredibly impressive, and it would be used to banish Deathwing to Deepholm. Huln would also use the hammer to cleanse one of the many eggs left by Deathwing, becoming the Black Dragon aspect we know today as Abyssian. Huln was so in line with himself and nature that even upon his death he would be reincarnated within Ardenwald, a land within the Shadowlands where powerful beings of nature undergo lengthy processes to be reborn into the living world. And at number 3, we have Gruul the Dragon Slayer. Gruul was exalted as the most powerful Grond to have lived, and would lord over the ogres of Outland. Gruul would be worshipped as a deity to the ogres, as his almost immeasurable strength and experience was heralded to none. Gruul would earn this title after killing numerous black dragons that resided in Outland. Shortly after the Second War, the orcs were pushed back through the Dark Portal, and the forces of Azeroth would follow them in the process. During this time, Deathwing would also do so, and with a large clutch of his black dragonflight eggs. At this point, the Aspects had already been driven mad, but he still desired an army of his children, and believed that hiding them in the mostly ruined world of Outland and minding his business would prove effective. Deathwing would leave his eggs in the regions of Gruul and his Grond, and they would take this as an act of challenge to them. As an act of war against Deathwing, Grond would crush many of his eggs, and any hatched dragons would be killed quickly and impaled upon the spikes of the Blade Edge Mountain. Being able to defeat dragons in WoW is no easy feat, as with their size alone they are considered some of the strongest creatures. On top of this, many are very in tune with magic and have timeless age on top of them for experience. Gruul would even combat Deathwing himself for a time, and managed to keep the aspect at bay with the aid of Khadgar, Turalyon, Illyria, and his own Grommash. Gruul was a mortal being and considered to be the most powerful Grommash in existence, far surpassing what his kind was known for. Most Grommash could be hunted by orcs, but Gruul was so strong and skilled that upon any attempt at killing him, the orcs would be slaughtered within his lair. And at number 2, we have Broxigar the Red. Broxigar was the brother of Varrock Sourfang, and was a long-known veteran orc warrior of the Horde. He'd tragically lose his compatriots in battle and would attempt to meet his own death at the guild had caused him. Broxigar would be sent on a mission to help detect an anomaly in the Stone Talon Mountains. Upon inspection of the anomaly, Broxigar would be sent back in time 10,000 years to the times of the War of the Ancients. This made Broxigar the first ever orc encountered in history, and he would be captured by the Night Elves and brought to Suramar. Broxigar would generally be treated like an animal by the Kaldorei, and was eventually freed by Tyrande, who would be placed in charge of protecting Malfurion Stormrage after he destroyed a spell that disrupted the Well of Eternity. During this period, Broxigar would come to earn a high reputation with the Night Elves, but typically through tinted glasses, as they did not see him as one of their own. Malfurion would bestow a special wood-carved axe that would weigh as light as a feather in Broxigar's hands. With his weapon, Broxigar would be the cause of death to literally thousands of demons by his hands alone. It would earn him the Red title, as oftentimes after a battle, Broxigar would be covered completely in the blood of demons. During the final battle at the Well of Eternity, Broxigar realized that in order for the world to be saved from the Legion, he needed to buy time. Broxigar would leap into the portal that allowed the demons enter into Azeroth and arrive on their homeworld, Argus. Broxigar would begin slaughtering demons that dared to enter the portal, and proceeded to create an entire mountain of demon corpses beneath his feet, and mocked more to challenge him. His carnage continued for so long that it drew the attention of Sargeras, and came to kill the orc himself. Broxigar, not even knowing who Sargeras was, only saw a new target, and charged forth with his axe in hand and managed to leave an actual wound upon the body of Sargeras. This wound alone splintered the spell used to hold open the gate for a second, but it was enough for Malfurion and Illidan to close the portal and leave Broxigar trapped, but ultimately proving his mission successful. While wounding Sargeras is an insane feat, Broxigar would not be the only one to do so. Tornar, the king of the Eldrachi people, referenced in the Vengeance Demon Hunter Legion artifact questline, challenged Sargeras to a duel and managed to leave him with a small injury as well. The Eldrachi were a warrior-like people, and their world would be taken over by the Legion, similar to the situation Broxigar faced, only he managed to complete the mission he sought out to do. Broxigar would be remembered by the Night Elves and all the races of Azeroth as a hero, and a statue would be created by the Night Elves in his honor, being the only orc in existence to receive such. For our final entry on this list, we have Galakrond, the father of the dragons. Galakrond has become known to many as being the largest known dragon and character we've ever actually seen in game, with the exception of Sargeras for a brief few seconds. Galakrond was so unbelievably large that his wings could create powerful gusts of winds when flying, and his roar was heard from miles away. Galakrond's younger stages in life began with the rest of the dragonkind before the revolution, meaning he was a proto-drake. As a proto-drake, he would hunt with his kind and generally act as needed until a change in him had occurred that is still unknown. This change was brought about when he began to cannibalize his own kind. Upon eating other dragons, they would be regurgitated as the not-living proto-dragons, which was basically just a different term for zombie dragons. These zombie dragons would obey every command of Galakrond, and carry out his will for him without question. The result of eating his fellow dragons would not only allow the zombie dragons to emerge, but also mutate Galakrond's body slowly over time. It is the reason he became so massive in size. Other mutations, like more eyes, tentacles sprouting from his body, his skin decaying, and spikes in places they shouldn't be, wound up forming across his body and further strengthened him. While this may seem like a power-up, it's something natural that could reoccur in proto-dragons or even regular dragons if it were to be done again. Because of this, the aspects themselves would keep it a secret as to how Galakrond became as he was to prevent it from happening again. As Galakrond evolved further, however, he eventually ran out of food to compensate for his hunger, and would begin to consume his own not-living proto-dragons to survive, but left enough of them to continue scouting for him. Galakrond was mortal like the previous entries, and he was still able to be killed despite his power. Galakrond had managed to put Tyr out of commission and remove his hand, leaving just the future aspects in charge of defeating him. They would manage to make the not-living dragons combat one another and distract Galakrond, and in the process, they would lodge large boulders into his throat and choke him to death. Even in death, Galakrond was still infamously known throughout the history of Azeroth, and in Wrath of the Lich King, Arthas would attempt to order his Scourge to revive the dragon as an undead to serve him. This task failed, however, as Galakrond's body and bones were far too large of a task to handle, even for an entire army. Even thousands of years after his death, the impact a single dragon made on the world was so feared that no one has truly harnessed the power Galakrond once had without consequences. Alright, and that's the list. There aren't many characters in WoW that don't use some form of magic, and it's pretty difficult to tie them down into a list of 10. Even without magic, however, some of the entries on this list were surely powerful enough to take down even the strongest of characters in WoW's lore. Were there any characters you think should have made this list or that you disagree with? If so, let us know down in the comments below.